and welcome back to my channel. My name is Charlotte and this is a history chronicle. First off, I just want to say thank you very much if you have subscribed to my channel, and if you haven't, if you just click that little subscribe button down the bottom, I would really appreciate it. I'm so close to having 20 subscribers and I didn't even think I'd have like 5. So if you could give me a little like or a little thumbs up or anything like that, I'd really like it. So on to today's video. I watched a documentary the other day and it was really fascinating to me, so I just wanted to look into it a little bit more and I wanted to talk to you guys about it. It was about someone that you may not have heard of because there isn't a lot really written about him. His name was Prince John and he was the current Queen's uncle. His father was George V and his mother was Queen Mary, and between them they had 6 children. There was David, who would become the future Edward VIII. There was Bertie, who would then go on to be the King George VI, current Queen's father. There was Mary, his sister. There was Henry, there was little George, and then there was John. John was born on the 12th of July in 1905 in Sandringham. It wasn't actually in Sandringham, it was on a little cottage on the estate called York Cottage. As a father, George V could be very frightening. He actually said once that he was frightened of his father and he was going to make damn sure his children were frightened of him, which I think is really silly. Like, who wants their kids to be scared of them? I feel like as a parent you should be someone that would want to protect your children, not be feared by them. Mary and George V had a bit of a weird relationship. They loved each other quite a lot, but they'd never really express it. In letters they would tell each other that they loved each other and that, you know, they were wishing that they could say these things to each other, but they never really did. Mary was quite shy and she was very good at wearing a mask of being a proper lady, the Queen of England. She portrayed herself as being a well-to-do lady, really. But that shyness went through to her being a mother. And when the children were really young, she would generally only spend about an hour a day with them. Not really a lot for a mum. With George V being this very harsh, by-the-book father, he didn't want his children running around and being childish. He wanted them to be seen and not heard. They didn't really like having the children running around and being wild, especially when they had guests. From a young age, all of the children were looked after by their nanny, and her name was Charlotte. Great name. But she would come to be known by the children as Lala, which I think is really cute because it reminds me of the Teletubbies. As I said, the family lived on a small cottage on the Sandringham estate called York Cottage. Now for me, this seems like a very large house because, I mean, the Sandringham estate's massive. But if you think this was a royal family, they had 6 children, nannies, butlers, maids, all the stuff that they needed. To me, for a family of 8, it didn't look like a very big house. But for me it is huge. As a little boy, John was known for being a really big practical joker. There's stories of him putting glue onto door handles all over York Cottage. He would walk into rooms and put pins on seats, so when people would sit down, they'd sit on these pins. He was a major practical joker. Unfortunately, at the age of 4, he was diagnosed with epilepsy. Today, we understand epilepsy a little bit more. Back then, it was something that they didn't really understand. Social standing in these times was a big deal, especially for the royal family. And having someone that would have a mental illness would be seen as having bad blood, so to speak, in the family. Most aristocratic families of this time would go to extreme measures to make sure that no one found out about this mental illness in their family. They even went as far as taking these people away from their family, putting them into an asylum, hospital, and actually having them erased from some of their family trees. It was literally like this person had died. An example of this is the Bowes-Lyon family. You may have heard that name before. The Queen's mother's maiden name is Bowes-Lyon. She had 2 relatives that were taken from their family and put into an institution and just forgotten. That being said, even though this was a royal family and it was a very social standing, John was never hidden. There were rumours flying around a few years ago that he was hidden from the public view, and he wasn't. He was in photos the family would take. He was publicised on a day out shopping. People could see him. His birth was announced. He was a prince. He wasn't hidden away. In recent years, studies have shown that around about 30% of people that suffer with epilepsy also have some learning difficulties. And I think that this is what happened with John. The family would call him Johnny, so I'm going to refer to him as Johnny for the rest of the video. George would always talk about the fact that Johnny was a very misbehaving boy. He hated the way that he would speak to his father, the way that he would act, the way that he wouldn't listen to people. Johnny even once called his father an ugly old man. Not a good move. Johnny loved to play little games, especially ones that were very repetitive. He would take a little box and put coins through the top like a little money box. He loved it. Repetitiveness was something that he reacted very well to. I think that this, linked with the behaviour, could also have put Johnny possibly on the autistic spectrum. By 1913, Johnny's life was due for a change. He was very close to his older brother George, and George would go away to school. Johnny was the only child left at York Cottage, so he seemed very lonely, but he had Lala all to himself. Around this time, there was a newspaper report put out about George going to school. It also stated that John was not going to follow his older brothers to the school and that his education would be kept private. This to me shows that the royal family didn't want Johnny to mix with other children, especially not in their social standing. But I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. In 1914, World War I broke out, and Johnny's life changed even more. He would hardly see his parents, who were constantly in London, and unfortunately, as he was getting older, his epileptic attacks were getting worse and worse. Queen Mary wanted Johnny to have friends that were his own age, but she knew that if they were aristocratic children, they would know that Johnny's behaviour wasn't exactly what a prince would have to be like. And then little whispers would probably start, and they didn't really want this. They wanted Johnny to have a nice life. So she organised for some of the children of the workers of the estate to come and visit Johnny every so often. They weren't familiar with procedures and processes for princes and princesses. They were just everyday normal children. So they wouldn't really have thought anything about how Johnny was behaving. So they were his friends. He got on so well with them. When he was 11, his formal teaching finished, with Johnny being the last prince left at York Cottage. The decision was made to move him and Nanny Lala to a little farm called Wood Farm, still on the Sandringham estate, just away from anywhere else. He lived here with Lala and he liked it. He'd see his parents whenever they'd come to visit, but he wouldn't see his brothers and sisters a lot. One day a week, Johnny was taken from Wood Farm up to the Sandringham estate to see his grandmother, Queen Alexandra. She understood Johnny so well. She had a little patch in her garden where he could plant flowers. Every week he would go up and plant new flowers, and the week later he would come back and she would have her gardeners dig up the seeds and plant fresh, gorgeous flowers so that he could come up and pick them. He would then write letters to his mother and father and put the flowers in the letters and send them to Buckingham Palace. And these were still found in the archives with the flowers attached to the letters, which I think is really sweet. It's something that the family kept. It shows that it wasn't a secret. They didn't want to hide Johnny. They loved him. They loved him so much that they kept these letters and these little flowers and these things that he did. Because that was his life, that was what he knew. As I said before, his siblings unfortunately wouldn't visit him a lot. This was later found out because they didn't want to see him have an epileptic fit. They were scared, they didn't know what to do, and it would upset them. But contrary to popular belief, his parents did visit quite often. They'd go and see him and spend time with him, especially Queen Mary. On the 8th of January 1919, at the age of 13, Johnny had a very large epileptic fit, and unfortunately he died. The newspapers reported the story of Johnny's death on the 20th of January, and this is when his medical records were also released in the article. This is the first time anyone in the public knew that Johnny had suffered from epilepsy. King George would go on to say that this was the greatest misery possible. He didn't want Johnny to be in pain anymore. He knew how much his fits hurt. He knew how difficult it was for Johnny, and he didn't want that for his son. So even though it meant he lost him, he knew that he was now in peace. After the newspaper article, rumours started to fly around that the King and Queen had tried to hide him, and this isn't true. They loved him and they wanted what was best for him. They just didn't understand what he had. They didn't understand epilepsy at that time. They didn't understand his learning difficulties. Today, it would have been a very different story. Unfortunately, not everyone in the family had the opinion of George and Mary. David, who would go on to be Edward VIII, wrote a letter to his mistress saying that he wasn't happy that he had to come out of the uniform that he'd been wearing for war and go into mourning. He didn't want that. He wanted to be able to go and have parties and have a social life. He also reportedly wrote a letter to Queen Mary. Now, we don't know what this letter said. I can take a very big guess at what it said, but we don't know what was exactly said because no one can find the letter. All we can find is a letter written afterwards from David apologising for the previous letter. So clearly what he said was not acceptable. Johnny was buried on the 21st of January 1919 at St Mary Magdalene's Chapel in the Sandringham estate. Later that day, Queen Mary visited Wood Farm. When she got home, she wrote in her diary. She wrote about what had happened that day. And this is when that shy wall that she'd been holding, keeping all of her emotions inside, slipped. And she simply wrote, "I miss the dear child there indeed." Johnny was loved by his family. Some of his family. They never wanted to hide him. But I just wanted to show you his story, because there aren't a lot of people that talk about him. Thank you very much for watching my video, and I hope to see you next time. If you do like this video, then give it a little bit of a like, and as I said at the beginning, please subscribe. It means a lot to me. Thank you very much. See you later.